So we want to start today with two things. An update, if you will. There's not really much information on it, but an update on the Nashville mass shooting, and then also more information on the Louisville mass shooting yesterday at the bank. Let's first start, Clay, with Nashville. Still no manifesto. A lot of stories out there about how the LGBTQ plus activists were really concerned about this coming out and the backlash against the community from this. So I don't see at this point how they won't even tell us what the declared, not that that's necessarily even what we have to accept as the motive, right? They can analyze it. Motive is always it's not totally subjective, but it can be a multifaceted thing. At this point, I don't see how it's anything other than a cover-up. They don't want people to know because they won't even tell us what they think the motive is. Doesn't take that long to figure this stuff out.
It's 15 days. And I came on and said that I had been told that the manifesto was going to be released, and I was, and it still hasn't happened. And Buck, note what's happened in Nashville. The story has shifted from psychotic trans shooter kills 6 innocent people at a religious elementary school to, can you believe these crazy Republicans made the decision to hold Democrats who took over the legislative chamber demanding gun control accountable for their behavior? Right? Think about how quickly that pivot has happened. Kamala Harris rolled into town this weekend to attack the state of Tennessee for anti-democratic processes. In the process, she was not willing or able to meet with any of the survivors of this shooting. And this, to me, is an example of how adroit and skilled the left wing in this country is at putting narrative over everything. Because the narrative of this shooter, and we're going to get to Louisville in a moment, we try to avoid, so you guys know, naming mass shooters on this show unless they are fugitives at large, and we think, hey, maybe we can help you guys with this big audience help to catch, like happened in the, if I remember correctly, Buck, the shooting that happened in Manhattan in the subway when that guy unleashed and then he was missing, and we said, hey, this is the guy they're looking for. And when the shooter is dead, we're not going to try to make them more famous based on sharing their names and whatnot and pictures. But this is how it happens. This is how stories like these shift, because it's 15 days. The narrative from this trans manifesto, we were told immediately that it existed, and then it just kind of vanished. The FBI came in, began their investigation. I don't know who signs off on the release now of this. I would guess the FBI has taken jurisdiction in some way over this manifesto. But do you trust the FBI to be honest and share with the American public? I don't, unfortunately, and so it needs to be released.
Ever since that moment, I brought it up before on the show, when the Obama administration FBI was editing out words from a recording from the transcript of the Pulse nightclub mass shooter, who was a jihadist, who was an Islamic radical, who was murdering people in a gay nightclub. And ever since they changed the words, and then they went back on it, by the way, it was so obvious and so politicized and stupid an act by the FBI that they changed, right? Imagine that. The outcry was because we all knew what was blacked out in those lines. We could figure it out from the context. So it was both authoritarian, or really totalitarian, and insulting, which often goes hand in hand, right? It was an effort to shape the political narrative in a way that doesn't take into account free-thinking human beings are the ones who are supposed to be able to discern this one way or the other. And so that's one component of it for me. I just think that now we see their whole game here is to delay it as long as possible, because then there'll be less of a public reckoning about whatever it is that would. It's very rare, as we know, for a woman to do something like this. So why? And she was a individual who self-identified as trans. Why would a woman go in there? And I mean, she shot little kids, right? This is as evil as it gets, and they will not tell us what happened. By the way, if she's just completely, I mean, obviously at some level it is just psychopathy and somebody that, probably needed to be institutionalized, but then tell us that, right? But if there are things that she pointed to in these manifesto policies that were being adopted by different states with regard to trans issues, we should know that people are being radicalized based upon that. Doesn't mean that it changes our behavior one way or the other, but there should be an awareness. It's a public safety issue to know why maniacs like this do what they do. Okay, that's one part of it. Speaking of psychopathic mass shooter maniacs, unfortunately, we have another one that we have more information on. And, it's obviously not very far off, just next door in Kentucky. But this, I think, is also based on the profile we expect, Clay, from mass shooters of different that fall into these different categories. This was, to a lot of people, a surprise. This guy was 25 years old. He live streamed the shooter in Louisville, which just obviously happened, yesterday morning. Live streamed the shooting on Instagram. Wow. And left a note to his parents telling them he was going to do this because he had been fired. So this is at some level the workplace massacre component. There may be more to it, but he's a very left-wing guy who hated Trump. And I think it's interesting, posted a lot about that. I'm not saying that's why he did this, but I do note that there's no discussion of this individual's politics whatsoever. And we know that wouldn't be the case if he were a MAGA hat wearing Trump supporter. These are the narrative issues that the media, these are, the narrative manipulations that the media engages in.
Yeah, this white guy was, and I think, again, we're not going to name him, the Louisville shooter, but I want to give you some of the details of his background. He was a graduate of the University of Alabama. He was aggressively anti-Trump, hated Donald Trump. In fact, for those of you out there who remember this football game, and I was there, he was furious that Alabama fans cheered Donald Trump at the LSU-Alabama game in 2019. I was at that game with my my Bama fan son, unfortunately, because I'm a Tennessee fan. But I was at that game. It was it was Joe Burrow against Tua Tagovailoa. For those of you out there who are big sports fans, it was iconic, one of the most watched college football games of the year. Trump traveled, and when they put him on the Jumbotron, Bryant-Denny Stadium went crazy. This guy was super upset as an Alabama grad that Alabama fans were cheering Trump. He was also a huge BLM supporter. He was a guy who had his pronouns in all of his professional resumes and professional LinkedIn profiles and all these other places. He was a far left-wing loon. Now, clearly, he was crazy. Something was off in him, as something is often off in all mass shooters, because this is not a normal thing to do. But if you're wondering, wow, that Louisville shooter, that story really kind of vanished in a hurry, we're not hearing very much about him, it's because he was a left-wing lunatic. And it doesn't fit the narrative for him to be a guy who hated Donald Trump and who was a huge BLM supporter and was a huge pronoun in the bio guy. Side note, if you own a company and you hire anyone who puts their pronouns in their bios, I think you are an imbecile, by the way. I would never, I ran a company for a long time. It's rare that I would look at something on a resume and say, this guy or this girl is out the window. You got your pronouns in it. That is it for me. That would be, I don't want to bring in these crazy people into my company. But this guy, if you're wondering, man, a white guy shot up a bank in Louisville. This is like typically the wheelhouse for Democrats. Why have they kind of vanished? And what happened with this story? There's your answer. It doesn't fit their prevailing narrative.
I remember hearing about workplace shootings. I think it was particularly in the late 90s. And there was this term that was being used because there were some postal workers, I believe, right, who went in and shot up their coworkers, essentially, of going postal. So workplace violence of that kind is, it's as horrific as it is not a new phenomenon, but it is interesting to see that the politics of this individual are not under discussion in the media at all as to perhaps exacerbating his psychological condition. I mean, I think that, and this is an argument that I have made during both of the BLM eras, when the most powerful media institutions in the country are telling people that there's effectively that not only is law enforcement racist, but there is a racist genocide of unarmed black men occurring in the country year in and year out. That has a very damaging effect on the psychology of people who aren't able to figure out that it is a huge lie and also are already somewhat mentally unstable. And I will just say this, you find any incident where there's somebody who is in some way affiliated with, ideologically, they can tie into if they're anti-government in the most broad sense, the left will go and they will find statements of individual members of Congress or the president if he's a Republican or whatever it may be, and tie it to that person right away. Say, your words led to this. This is what they do every time. But then when you look at the guy who shot up the baseball field, for example, under the Trump administration, shot Steve Scalise, almost killed Senator Rand Paul. He was a huge Bernie Sanders supporter who was yelling that he did it for health care because they were opposed to Obamacare. That was that mass murderer's motivation, which still I think some people, and we know that because Rand Paul heard him screaming, this is for health care, as he's shooting at everybody, okay? No discussion of, hey, maybe members of the Senate who are Democrats shouldn't pretend that Republicans want poor people to die of cancer without any assistance or any health care because they're so greedy, So it's just, I'll note, you can tell me that we shouldn't do this, period, but every time it happens, I do believe it's worth noting that the left always ties it to their political enemies when they can, and when it's somebody who is of the left, they bury it as fast as they possibly can as a story. It just disappears, and we're not supposed to focus on any of the rhetoric. Have you heard anyone talk in the last couple of weeks about the political temperature in this country? That's the phrase they use. The political temperature is just so high right now when it's a right-wing person that does something, outrageous. Can we put on an ask here? I'm curious. I mean, Steve Ducey will probably be able to get this one. I'm sorry, Peter Ducey would be able. Right. Sorry, I know they're both great. I just get Ducey of the White House. Perhaps he could get this question. I want someone to ask the Biden, and I really mean this. Ask the Biden administration, why did the vice president have time to go stand with two individuals who broke the rules of their organization, their body, and were punished rightly under the rules in Tennessee? Time to go stand with them in solidarity. No time for the families of the mass murdered individuals and including murdered children in Nashville, though. I would like the White House to be asked that question.